They do not say they have transport integration because they are rich. They say they are rich because they have transport integration.
Welcome to Calling All Stations, the transport podcast. I'm Chris Green OBE, an author and journalist who has covered transport for the past 30 years. And in every episode, we try to keep you up to date with the most engaging news stories, policy developments, and interviews in the transport world. And with me is my regular co-presenter, Mark Walker, who has spent decades looking at transport policies and legislation. So, Mark, what are we covering today?
Hello, Christian, and hello to our listeners. We have two main segments of this edition of Calling All Stations. Later on, we'll be looking to the future and talking to Thomas Ableman about a proposal for a mini Switzerland of integrated transport in the Peak District of England. But before that, we'll be learning lessons from the past in a discussion you've had with Chris Green OBE, former managing director of ScotRail and later of Network South East under British Rail. And here's the interview.
I'm with Chris Green, who used to run ScotRail and then Network South East in the days of British Rail. And I thought I'd have a chat with him after seeing him give a presentation about his time at BR, because there's a lot of lessons for Great British Railways in what he has to say. So, Chris, thank you ever so much for coming on Calling All Stations. And do start off with, not all listeners will know of you, but with your experience and what you did with your time at British Rail.
Yes, so I've been a career railwayman. I began as a management trainee, very good training scheme. So we had 18 months in which we were taught our trade and moved around the country doing different things.
Then you did things like you were freight on one day and then you'd be a assistant station master another, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and it was really good experience looking back because you can't beat actually doing the job.
Right.
So then middle management was very much jobs that the railway chose to put you into, and then senior management was the exciting one where you got your own command and you had to use all that experience you developed. So ScotRail in my case was my first
and we knew the whole railway as a result of that. That's something that GBR won't be able to offer so much. Where people like you, who were both operators and effectively worked the crew on the rail track as well.
We were seen every month by the general manager, and I remember his advice was, do look over the fence wherever you go. Just because you've gone to look at signalling in Preston doesn't mean you shouldn't look at fleet engineering or civil engineering. Good advice.
So tell me what happened at ScotRail, where you arrived when it was a bit of a mess, I think.
Yes, by chance, I was appointed to 3 jobs in ScotRail in 1980 to 86, and a disaster had hit Scotland in many forms. First of all, the coaches and buses in Scotland had been deregulated. Only in Scotland, because England wanted to see how it worked in Scotland.
Stagecoach, right, the Suter, yeah.
All that.
Yeah.
And they had the absolute freedom to run anytime they wanted, unlicensed, charge any fare they wanted, and of course their top priority was to undercut us. Meanwhile, I
remember you saying £1 from Glasgow to Perth, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly that. And we were charging the standard fare, which is probably nearer £15. At the same time, Strathclyde PTE was given bills they couldn't possibly afford to maintain their trains, and they were talking about cutting a third of their network out and using their buses for the traffic. And thirdly, looking round Scotland, it was desperately underinvested as a railway. Stations, trains, staff, track, everything felt run down. So it really was a crisis.
And so what did you do? You decided, I think, to either give in and basically give up or to fight.
We called it flee or fight, and
Right.
We was my executive team, and we decided we could only fight if we were given the freedom from London to do it. And we were 400 miles away. London was really worried about the situation, but obviously didn't know what to do from 400 miles away. We could see what needed to be done, but didn't have the freedom. So the chairman, to his eternal credit, gave us that freedom.
The chairman of British Rail.
Bob Root won.
Right.
And he said, I want you to fight and I'll support what you do.
Right.
And he did.
So what was your program?
So we got together as an executive, and in one afternoon we decided we needed to completely relaunch ourselves as a different railway because our reputation was so terrible. And we decided in that one meeting that we wanted the name ScotRail. The name British Rail, ScotRail didn't trip off the tongue, but the word ScotRail does. And that was probably the most important decision we made. Everyone loved it.
And that was whose idea was that?
Well, 4 of us. Just
Oh, yeah.
you know how these ideas get tossed around.
So you didn't pay some huge consultancy?
No, we didn't. And in my experience, no one person has the idea on the railway, but too big. So that was a group decision. We got that one right, I think. And to this day, if you're in Japan or Australia and say you work for ScotRail, they know exactly what you mean. And the important thing was the Scots loved it. So from being a railway they hated, we suddenly became their railway.
Right.
And the nation owned it.
Very clever.
Unions did, politicians were terrific, and the media was terrific. So suddenly we were all aligned that the nation wanted ScotRail, the new ScotRail, to do something exciting. And they wanted us to capture back the traffic. They'd seen the coaches pirate from us, and the word pirate was used. So we did just that, and for a period of time we charged £1. I mean, really going in with this. We just empowered ourselves to do it, and at some point we had to make up the loss, but not in year one. So we fought back hard with the coaches. We had big advertising campaigns. We smartened up 300 stations, every station, smartened up every train, and we then dared to advertise. So the National Tourist Board started promoting ScotRail from America and Australia and New Zealand and everywhere. And we suddenly became a destination. So cutting a long story short, the freedom we were given enabled us to push back the coach competition, increase income by 20%, and use that income to invest. So we got into a virtual circle.
Right.
But there's no way we could have done that with committees and writing letters and asking for permission. We had to be trusted.
Right. And that was trusted by British Rail 400 miles away.
Yes. And in the first year or two, we must have lost money because we were fighting back against the coaches. By the end, we were making significant money. We were able to invest in 15 new stations, and we even rolled back beaching by reopening the Bathgate line. So it did work.
Right. And did Bob Reid, one as he was, come up and check what you were doing at all?
I realised afterwards that he was, because his sister lived in Oban, but I didn't know that at the time. So he was well aware what was happening. But being Bob Reid, if you didn't hear from him, just keep going.
Right.
When he did come up, I thought it was to say thank you. I think he managed to say the word, but his next phrase was, "Now I want you to do a ScotRail in London." So just when I thought I was going to enjoy Scotland for a few more years, I was moved at 2 weeks' notice to London and told to do exactly the same thing on a gigantically bigger network.
Which was what? What was it? How would you sum up your success in ScotRail? I mean, what would you say the most important thing was?
We brought respect back for the railway network. We aligned everybody, so the staff, the public, the unions, the media, everyone thought Scotland was a winner. And when you've got everyone behind you like that, you can do miracles.
Right.
So the opening of the 15 new stations all involved one of the regional councils putting money into their pocket to build the station. We then would take it into our budget. So there was a very willing cooperation to make rail work in Scotland.
Right. So they would pay for the capital cost, and you would then pay the operating cost of running extra trains.
Which was a good formula, which we copied later on.
Right. Okay. So you get transferred down to London suddenly.
Yep.
When was this?
1986, and it felt like Groundhog Day. Almost identical problems. The commuters hated the railway. The MPs were attacking us. The media was attacking us. Why weren't we cleaning up the railway? And unfortunately, the new business sector which was called London and South East, had been told to cut its costs by a third. And you imagine being told to cut your costs by a third in 3 years. And they'd done it, and they'd done it by just not recruiting any staff. So I was now faced with a huge shortage of drivers, guards, ticket inspectors, carriage cleaners, all the frontline people who keep the railway running. And that was the only way you could cut your costs.
So what was London and South East? What did it encompass?
All suburban trains running south of Peterborough and Northampton and as far as Exeter, in fact, on one route. So the whole of a sudden big. It was a quarter of British Rail.
Right.
And had 30,000 staff. and more importantly, had 500,000 commuters who were utterly fed up.
And you were the MD, or the
Yes.
you were called the MD.
So I was being asked to take on the job of MD and do a ScotRail. So I used my honeymoon to say very quickly, I can't do it unless you give me the same freedom I had in Scotland, which was a much bigger ask.
Right, this is a much bigger railway, isn't it?
Much
It's
bigger railway.
bigger than the whole of Scotland.
Right in the eye of government, MPs and the media. So everything that was happening was going to impact back on Bob Reid, one of the board. So what he did, he said, leave it with me. And he talked to the Secretary of State, Nicholas Ridley, who was a delegator, luckily. And Nicholas Ridley said, yep, we're going to manage my delegation. So he delegated the financial responsibility for the next 5 years to Bob Reid. He redelegated it to his 5 sector directors, of which I was one.
5 sector. Oh, you mean there's a Network South East,
Yeah.
Intercity, and so on.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And I did it in my turn down to subsectors. So we really had a chain going all the way down. The board and the government were absolutely clear what they wanted. They really did want a ScotRail down in London. In other words, smarten up the railway and make people proud of it. And we had that freedom. And to be fair with them, they gave us that freedom right the way through till 1990, when there was a financial crash.
We'll come to that afterwards, but let's see first of all how you succeeded in turning it around. I mean, what was you arrived there? What's your first thing to do?
I think it was to learn from ScotRail. So for once in our lives, and Britain's not very good at copying best practice, we had a best practice in Scotland, which I've been involved in. So I immediately saw that the lessons of ScotRail worked perfectly well in London. We didn't have to reinvent it. And that meant we could come in running.
What are these best practices?
So first of all, freedom to manage, which we'd achieved. Secondly, the belief that if you really smartened up the railway, you could get more passengers, and those more passengers gave you more income, and that meant you could reinvest, and you had a virtuous circle.
Right.
More passengers, more investment. And it did work. So that took time. And the other lesson was you actually have to relaunch yourself if you want to be seen as dramatically different.
Right. So how did you do that in the Southeast?
This time we didn't just sit down for an afternoon and choose the name, because there wasn't an obvious name. So we asked 11 of the best agencies in Britain to come in and advise us, and they came in within 6 weeks. So within 6 weeks of arriving, we'd come in running, looking for a name, a brand, a marketing plan, and a partner who could work with us. The one who won was J. Walter Thompson.
And they were all pitching with the contract. So you nicked their best ideas.
So we had 10 free consultants, one we paid for.
Right.
And they were all excellent, loads of good ideas. J. Walter Thompson won. They had 200 names listed, and they'd researched them all, and they said the best one was Network South East. And that was the first time I'd heard of the name. And we decided after some thought, not the same day, but over a few days, that this was the right name. We liked the brand they had, and we loved their marketing campaigns. They were really gung-ho. So we said, you're appointed. And they said, sorry, we're not going to accept because we don't want to be tarred with the reputation of your product, which is terrible. Rundown trains, cancellations.
So then they bid for the contract. They said, oh, no, we don't want to do this. Unless you improve the...
Exactly that. So they said, unless you can improve it. And they were right. So we should have spotted that, but there wasn't time. So we then said we would give ourselves 100 days to get the product improved, and we called it Operation Pride. And we said to all 30,000 staff, the absolute priority for the next 100 days is performance, performance, performance. And they said, you'll have to give us some funding to make that happen. So I took a risk, and this is where the delegation comes in. This is Trem and Trustworthy. I gave myself an extra £10 million we hadn't got on the basis that I could get it back through extra income, either by the end of the year or at least the next year. And it proved to be the next year. That enabled us to put back all the missing staff. We recruited like mad for drivers, guards, ticket inspectors, cleaners, all the ones that the government had forced us to take out 3 years earlier. And the staff then started walking tall. They started cleaning up the stations and doing the things that we needed doing because they saw hope. And the passengers picked up the message, and so did the media. So after 100 days, it did look a lot better. J. Walter Thompson accepted it was going to get better and better as the months went by, and they accepted the contract.
Which was for what? To give you an image? To
relaunch the Network South East brand in a way which transformed people's perceptions. So we wanted to see clean trains, clean stations, punctual trains, smart staff, get more income. And the absolute key in London was to get more income in the off-peak. Because in the peak, you had enough passengers anyway. You bought all the trains.
Commuters.
Yeah,
Right.
you bought all the trains. You bought the track as infrastructure. You had the staff. In the off-peak, it's almost profit, almost 100% profit. So all the marketing was aimed at getting more people off-peak. And the big idea here was ticketing, make ticketing simpler. And we did that with the one-day capital card. So
What was that? What was that?
So I said, if you bought a day return from your local Network South East station,
Yeah.
the price would include the Freedom of London Underground after 9:30, London buses, London tubes.
So you had to do a deal with London Transport to get that.
We worked superbly well with London Transport. So we were together every week at meetings, months. We had joint campaigns, joint investment. The things like Crossrail and Thameslink began jointly.
Right.
So one day capital card became a £100 million product in 3 years, which was the entire income of ScotRail in off-peak travel in London. What was really exciting was 20% of those passengers were new to rail.
Right.
And they'd been attracted by the Walter Thompson advertising and the smarter product they found when they tried it. And it was super simple ticketing, simple advertising. Really,
What was the slogan at the time? Do you remember it?
is swanning around London. So
Right, with a swan poster. Yeah.
so after London, why not swan around London on a one day?
Right. There's a picture of a swan of it. Yes.
And then we decided we'd go a bit further, and we invented the network card, which said after 10 o'clock, because we were starting to get a rush hour at 9:30, after 10 o'clock, you can go get a third off all your tickets. And then that started to fill up. So we said after 10:30, you get free car parking. And that was an absolute winner. You couldn't do that today because we had space.
Because all the car parks are full.
Yeah. And in those days, it was run down and there was loads of space.
Right.
So that got people moving, and there was huge goodwill in that. Because these were seen as really good offers. And people brought their families, and we had network days where you could travel anywhere in the network for £3, etc. And of course, everyone went to the Isle of Wight, which got very overcrowded, but it was a nice idea. And
Now, whose idea was all this? You personally or your team?
it's a team. No, you toss these ideas around over a coffee, and I then said yes. And the important thing is we were left to do all this. And weren't having to double check. They weren't saying the letters up saying, please can
You
we do
didn't have to say, "Oh, can we have a network day, please?"
So the one rule was you must live inside the budget. I'd have been out if we'd. But if
Although you just said you bust your budget by 10 million, but that was
for 1 year. So yearly. So taking 1 year in the other, I think was the phrase. We kept well within the 5-year plan, and then we invested like mad in better stations, and we had to do up 900 stations. We couldn't do them all at once, so we tried to think how we can make an impact, and the answer was red lampposts. So suddenly all 900 stations appeared with red lampposts, and then with red clocks and red seats, and we'd got our brand image and the name Network South East.
so. You very quickly painted all the lampposts on all the stations.
Because, and I should have said this earlier, the big thing about Network South East, it's the one and only time there's ever been one organisation for the mainline trains in London.
Right.
They've all been separate routes. You had the Great Western route. And
Yeah, of course. Different companies. Yeah.
Suddenly we had one, and we were like London Transport, like a donut. We were the outer circle of the donut. London Transport was the inner circle. And on the whole, my passengers almost all use the underground, and a great chunk of the underground passengers use mine. So at the end of the day, it's one network.
Right.
So we put this map up in all the stations, and then we said, here's a network day so you can explore.
You put a map of the network, which had never happened before. Right.
And
Showed everything from Peterborough to Weymouth to Canterbury to deepest Hampshire. Yeah.
And people tended to know that their local station had a route to London. They didn't know where it went the other way. So in my case, it went to Birmingham Airport, which amazed people. They just didn't know they could get to Birmingham Airport by train. On other routes like Ashford, they might not know they could get to the coast at Margate. Right. All these things. That really worked. And then we put out a public manifesto, which we printed 750,000 copies, gave them to every passenger and staff, and said,
Well, you just handed them out. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Really?
Right. Yeah. Anyone with a hand was given one. And this committed us to what we were going to achieve over the next 5 years.
So what sort of things did that have in it?
So we said we will upgrade every single train we possess, so something smart. We will employ a huge number of additional cleaners to make certain you can see out of the windows. We employed heavy cleaning gangs for stations with their own vans to get around. We said there'd be a new networker train, which is now the networker Kent 465, of great fame, which became our mascot. And that was a £1 billion investment in those days. And that required the Secretary of State to go to Margaret Thatcher in the Chequers and get her endorsement, which he did.
Right.
And which she did. So
Did he persuade her?
I wasn't there, but it certainly worked. And he came back and just said, go out to tender fast, which we did. So those trains became our symbol. People saw this as a really modern railway, radically different to the old slam door trains on the route. And our image was never higher, I think, than in 1990. We really had, by then, modernized virtually every station and every train. And we were starting to talk about the big projects like Crossrail and Thameslink for the future.
But then...
Well, in 1990, it all looked so tremendous. And then suddenly we found that everything went to pieces in one go. So basically the national income went wrong. So there was a financial crisis and a recession. That meant less commuters into London. Yeah. That meant less income, and it meant the Treasury did what it always has to do in these crises and stopped investing in public industry. Yeah. So suddenly we were told overnight, no more investment, and it's all about putting fares up and not incurring cost. So that really changed the way we were doing things. But where we were lucky is the networker train, which Cecil Parkinson had helped us get, was a contract, legal contract, with two different companies, and it was too expensive to break that contract. So right the way through the recession, we were getting deliveries of our new trains. We were scrapping old trains, and that saved a huge amount of money.
Oh, what? Because they're cheaper to run?
New trains are massively cheaper to run, and they were built for driver-only operation, and all but two lines were driver-only operation by then. Lighter weight, carried more passengers, and more attractive, more passengers.
Right.
So they were a win-win. So we were lucky with that, and we were unlucky with the big projects. So Thameslink and Crossrail were actually in Parliament in 1991, and the Parliament was told by the Treasury there is no money.
Thameslink at the time was famously called Thameslink 2000, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And we were going to have Thameslink for less than half $500 million, and it came out finally in the
many years
later at $4.5 billion. A better scheme, to be fair, but massively more expensive. And that's a good example where, in the Treasury's eyes, it couldn't fund something long term in the middle of a financial crisis, and yet that's what needed to happen. If you're building a train that's going to last 30 years. It shouldn't be influenced by a very short-term financial crisis.
No, and Keynesian economics had it that you should be doing things in a recession like that anyway.
Yeah. So you cut back on minor investment costs, but you keep the big ones going. And you can see it with the Elizabeth line. It's been a spectacular success, but we had to wait so much longer for it.
Long after the days of network selfie. So what was your most pride, or the thing you had most pride about in terms of having created Network South East?
It was the creation of one railway for London, and the sense that Hare was a brand that really stood for Londoners, and the enthusiasm it created. The staff came to work happy and were coming up with new ideas. They were using their own initiative to do things. Stations were opening, which I didn't know we were opening. Of course, the subsectors had the authority to do these things. And
so you had how many subsectors?
6.
Right. And they had quite a lot of authority.
Yeah. So, for example, if they really couldn't get the outside of the trains clean, they had the authority to buy a carriage wash machine for £500,000.
Right.
Install it and do it. They didn't need to come to me, and I didn't need to go to the Treasury. Today, you would have to go to the government to get that authorised, and that means business cases and probably 6 months.
Right.
In my case, the subsectors could produce a 1-page to me saying, we're going to do it. Any objections? No, off you go. Done.
Right.
So that worked well. That's why all the trains got clean, for example. And there are plenty of other examples like that.
So That brings us on nicely to 2026. Because basically, Network Southeast, along with Intercity and everything, was abolished in the mid-90s by privatization, and we all know that we don't have a franchise railway for the next 30 years. But then we're getting Great British Railways again. So what do you think are the lessons now for Great British Railways out of this experience, and can we learn from that?
Yes, we can. History never fully repeats itself, so we've got to accept that it'll be different.
It's a different world, yes. It's not as powerful as British Rail.
But I think the big lessons from my time in ScotRail and Network Southeast are that, A, you've got to have a full alignment between what the government wants the railway to deliver and what we think we're delivering and what the Treasury can afford and what the staff and unions understand. So if you've got that alignment...
So, that's a wonderful story, Chris, but what are the lessons for GBR, and can they be replicated?
But I think you have to get yourself aligned with government. What does government want? Because at the end of the day, government's paying the railways a very high subsidy. So what's the railway for? Can you agree what you want to do for the next 5 years, which is the life of a government, effectively? And can you get the Treasury to agree to fund that? If you've got all that, you've got alignment. Then I think the most important thing is you must be given freedom to deliver. We don't want the government in any part of itself, Department of Transport or Treasury, pulling up the vegetables to see if the routes are still working.
One of the ironies of rail privatisation is that there's tended to be even greater check on what is invested in than under British Rail.
Yeah, and it's never been worse than now. So post-COVID, where there was a huge deficit and the government was in trouble, the reaction was to double guess and triple guess everything.
Right.
Wrong. There should have been to have agreed with the industry what it must achieve or you lose your job, and then please deliver it.
Right.
So I was always aware I'd be out of a job if I messed up. And messing up was defined effectively as not achieving the 5-year funding. So you must not, you do a deal for so much funding, you must deliver it. Within that envelope, you want total freedom.
But so you think government has to give GBR a kind of a medium-term budget?
Yes, and the freedom to deliver it. And a government shouldn't be double-checking everything. They should be saying, are you still within budget? And very broad picture, how are the other parts working? Not double-checking that every train's on time, because that's the railway's job to do that. Secondly, the government does need to recognise that income is just as important as expenditure. There's a tendency in government when things are going badly to say not interested in any new scheme which involves income growth. You only want to...
I've heard many examples of it, but you gave me some earlier today. I mean, there's a lot of examples of that where they just don't consider income.
Yeah. So when Thameslink was first opened between the tunnel between Farringdon and Blackfriars, we were told we could only have that investment.
So Thameslink, for example.
Yeah, so when we wanted to reopen the new tunnel between Farringdon and Blackfriars, which is the core of Thameslink, the Treasury just wouldn't hear about it unless we could make the case on cost reduction. The obvious case was there's going to be more income because more passengers will cross London. No, it has
so that seems to be kind of axiomatic. You're opening up routes that couldn't happen before. Surely some people would use.
But if you're in the Treasury, your view is you can't prove you're going to get that extra income until you got it, but you can prove that you've got cost savings.
Right.
So we proved we could have cost savings, and we'd need less trains if we joined up the two sides of London. And that proved to be true, and that got the tunnel built. So that got us cracking. A more mature business approach is to say within your budget or 5-year plan, you have freedom to use the income and use the expenditure. And in the case of Network Southeast, it was all about growing the off-peak income.
Right.
And I knew that was going to work, but we had to prove it to the Treasury about
And you think that's still the case? There's still a lot of potential to grow off-peak income.
You can see why freedom to manage is so important. If we hadn't had freedom to manage, we'd have had people double guessing us, say you can't assume there's going to be more income by promoting off-peak travel in London.
Right.
I took that risk, and we took that risk, and it worked.
Right. And so do you think there is potential for GBR to take on initiatives like that, to have the sort of marketing initiatives and
I think they've got to be humbled enough to accept that in the last few years we've lost the confidence of the Department of Treasury in delivering. So we've got to prove we can deliver.
Because of electrification on the Great Western, because of HS2, because of...
And looking back, I had to do that too, and it worked. But the trick is to have some small steps to make them work. And a good example, I think, will be Scottish electrification has been done at half the price recently of the Great Western scheme. Right. The Treasury is still using the Great Western number for the future electrification. Wrong. So we got to persuade the Treasury we've done this right in Scotland. Now please accept that and let's use that as a new standard. Then we have to deliver the new standard.
Isn't one of the problems that, I mean, you're part of a generation of managers who all went through the BR graduate training scheme. I mean, do you think there are the people out there to run the new integrated Great British Railways?
Yes, I do. So I have a lot of involvement with the new generation, and I find them pretty inspirational, and they are just as good, probably better than us, and they're really, really frustrated they aren't being given the freedom we had. So we achieved much more than they can because we had the freedom to show you what we could do. And if only we can get there, and there's got to be some trust in this, and we've got to accept that jobs are at risk if we mess up.
So probably your most fundamental message is create GBR and then
earn the freedom to manage.
Right. And that requires good management, but it also requires ministers to agree to do that.
Yeah. And it's not going to be done overnight. You've got to take it in bite-sized chunks. You earn it for a small scheme, then you earn it for a middle-sized scheme, and then for a bigger one. There's lots to go for. There's huge income opportunities still on the railway.
So you're quite excited by this?
Yeah, I think we got a really good team. Let's free them up to manage.
Well, that's a great place to end on, and on the dot of half an hour, Chris. So absolutely perfect. And thank you very much for being on Calling All Stations.
Christian, that was a fascinating discussion. What were your main takeaways, having had a little bit of time to think about it?
Well, and as I've written in my rail column on it, because it was such an interesting interview, I thought it needed maximum exposure. I think the absolutely key point he makes and stresses all the time is that rail managers under Great British Railways have to be given the same sort of freedom that he had. He did all sorts of innovations, but as he said to me, if I'd had to write letters or ask for meetings with Treasury officials before I did anything, I would never have been able to do any of it. And that's how he was able to really transform both these railways. And as he says, I mean, they were both in crisis when he arrived, ScotRail and subsequently Network South East. And, they needed somebody with that kind of managerial skills to transform them and then really bring them to good health.
And of course, it was interesting, wasn't it, to hear how British Rail had nurtured this sort of cadre of managerial talent through its graduate training scheme so that they could train people up, then let them loose actually to run the various parts of the British Rail organisation, as Chris indeed did.
Yes, and I asked him about this. I said, are there the people to do this? And he said, look, he's met a lot of them. He's been going around the railway talking to people, and he thinks there's a very good cohort of managers available. They just have to be given their head, as it were, and allowed to, make decisions and launch initiatives without having to come to the Treasury or worse, ministers before they can do anything.
There were a couple of other aspects that I found especially interesting as a communications person. First of all was that in the case of ScotRail, the brand was thought up by the management team themselves without any external advice, and has lasted all these years. 45 years on, ScotRail is still a recognised brand in the UK and around the world. But also when it came to the Network South East branding, they did bring in the external advisors, but the winners of the competition to provide the external advice and the branding and the advertising campaign said, we won't work for you until you've actually made your product better. because we're worried that it would tarnish our own reputation as a firm. So they actually had to smarten up and clean up Network Southeast before the branding and marketing people would work for them.
Yes, I thought that was a brilliant story, and there's always that thing that is mentioned that they painted lampposts at all the stations, like literally hundreds of lampposts, and just giving, and benches, and just giving things a lick of paint, kind of transformed places, and I can see that today. Some stations kind of do look a bit run down and sad, and if you just you don't have to kind of completely rebuild them. You just have to kind of give them a bit of TLC. And let's hope that that is something that under GBR happens, because just creating that impression of the railway, sometimes you go to stations and you can't find them. That happened to me the other day. I went to Newmarket Station and I was cycling down the main road towards it. And then there's no signs as to where that actual station is. And it's actually down a very small road, kind of, about 100 yards. But there was no sign to say, oh, the station's that way. And I had to ask some dog walker, where's the station gone? I could see the railway. I couldn't see the station. So it's those sort of things, that really, really are essential. I always think there ought to be, trains to X, Y, and Z are from here, big signs up, all that kind of thing, because GBR must be seen as a success. It's a very important initiative for the Labour government, and it must be seen as something that kind of wins people over.
Now, your second interview deals with the transport system of the future. And it's a discussion with Thomas Ableman, who's the founder of an organization called Freewheeling, which helps to transform public transport. Thomas has undertaken a study in how we could import some of the great ideas for integrated public transport, which have been deployed in Switzerland, and bring them to the UK. And here's your discussion with Thomas.
Okay, I'm with Thomas Ableman, who has developed a concept to improve rural transport, indeed public transport in rural areas, which has always been a very difficult conundrum for local authorities and transport people to solve. And he's been to Switzerland to see how it operates there, and he's come back with the idea of Mini Switzerland, which he wants to kind of test out in the UK. So, Tom, just tell me first of all, what brought you this idea, and how your trip to Switzerland has influenced you.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I was in Switzerland on holiday, as I often am, because as someone who doesn't drive through choice, it's one of the only places you can go where, as a non-driver, you have exactly that same sense of freedom to go anywhere you like, whenever you like, that car drivers in the UK are used to everywhere, including rural areas. But it's something that there is no equivalent for in the UK at all. I was in Pashpels, which is a small village of 475 people in Graubünden, which is a heavily rural area of Switzerland, about half the population density of Scotland. And Pashpels, like every village in Switzerland, has a hourly bus service. This bus connects to two different railway stations, meaning you have a service in each direction, so actually roughly every half hour to a station. The one I used was the train to the local market town, Thusis. That bus arrived at Thusis station at 59 minutes past the hour. As it arrives, the train pulls into the station. You have a seamless 3-minute connection from immediately outside to the platform, and then the train departs to the local major city of Chur at 2 minutes past the hour, which means you can get from Pashpels to Chur every half hour in 45 minutes, all day, every day.
What was that? I presume this was the lovely yellow buses with post bus on the side.
Absolutely. The vast majority of rural buses in Switzerland are still run by Swiss Post. Though, if anyone has ever used a post bus in the UK, and typically in rural Scotland, this is nothing like a British post bus. It's a very different experience. Very modern, large, double-doored bus full of people.
Was it full
these-
of people? There were lots of other people on the bus with you.
Yeah, absolutely. These buses are well used. This is not standing room only, but this is get on the bus and have to find a seat. This is, I was with my daughter. This is, are there two seats together territory. These buses are well used all day, every day. They run from about 5 a.m. through to midnight. And this is entirely typical. Every single village in Switzerland of 300 people or more has an hourly bus that connects to the local railway station, and it meets the train at that station perfectly. So the bus arrives, the train arrives, you get on the train, and in the other direction, the train arrives, you step outside, the bus is there waiting for you, taking you to the village. I think of it.
And all
as a
these
bit
people
like
on the bus, all these people on the bus were mostly hopping on the train into town.
Not mostly. Some were going to Thusis, which is kind of what a bus in the UK is the only thing you can do. It always goes to the local market town. That's it. But a lot of them were going onto the train. And of course, they were also connecting onto the other buses, because all the buses from all the villages arrive at the same time and they all leave at the same time.
Oh.
So everyone, if you imagine, in Britain, you have a local bus to your village. It's probably runs 2 or 3 times a day at best, often once a week. That bus only goes to one place, the market town. Whereas in Switzerland, they all connect with each other and they all connect with the train. So everyone can go everywhere, every hour. And I mean, everywhere is in everywhere in Switzerland, because those trains then themselves connect up with the intercity trains perfectly. So there's just this perfect, constant, hourly, seamless connectivity from everywhere to everywhere, every day, 7 days a week, 18 hours a day. That's just how it works. And for them, it is normal. And it's so different to us.
Who pays for this and how does that work?
Yeah, so it's roughly 50-50. 50% comes from the taxpayer, 50% comes from the fare payer. Now, they have much better statistics overall. But if you look at the UK, it's not that different. You talk to bus operators in the UK, about half their revenue comes from the fare payer, half comes from the taxpayer. And if you look at our railway network, we're not far off that figure either. It is not a perfect comparison, but we're not in a dramatically different place. Now, obviously, the 50% are both much bigger there. Their fare box is much bigger and the subsidy line is bigger. But for their 50-50, they get transformationally better outcomes than we have. In the UK, a rural bus is barely used. I was on a bus recently in Scotland. I went to Tinebrew, which, if you've not been there, is a stunning little village in Argyll. I went 4 times on this bus, which takes about an hour to get to Tinebrew from the nearest market town. Of the 4 journeys I made, 3 of them, I was the only passenger on that bus. And if I hadn't been there, that bus would have done the entire hour's journey completely empty. Whereas in Switzerland, they are packed. And so, yes, the taxpayer makes a substantial contribution, but the taxpayer gets a perfectly seamlessly connected country for that 50%.
But they're a rich country. They can afford this, and we can't afford this.
Of course, that's entirely true. But here's a really interesting thing, okay? Listen really carefully. This is so important. On my podcast recently, I spoke to Helmut Eichhorn, the chap at Swisspass, CEO of Swisspass, which is the Transport Integration Authority responsible for ticketing information across Switzerland. And the final question I asked him was, how should we do, if a country wants to do Swiss-style transport integration, where should they start? What's the first thing they should do? And I quote what he said precisely. He said, the first thing you should do is to ensure that your people and your politicians understand that this is the way to become a very wealthy country. They do not say they have transport integration because they are rich. They say they are rich because they have transport integration. And that is not me saying that. That is them saying that.
That's brilliant. Right. Brilliant. Okay, so you're going to try and bring this to the UK.
Well, that's the thing. So as always on holiday in Switzerland, I thought, why can't it be like this in the UK? And of course, I know why it can't be like this in the UK, because our regulatory structures are different, our competition law is different, our political system is different, our market structures are different. Everything makes it almost impossible. I mean, genuinely almost impossible to achieve anything like this in the UK. And so one always thinks, it can't be done. But then I had an idea, and I have a huge advantage in this respect because I live in Walthamstow. And one of the very few good things that Boris Johnson did, and it was when he was mayor of London, and he came up with the idea of Mini Holland. And this was when he was really promoting bike travel. And we had, far more than we do now, really terrible bike infrastructure in the UK. And so he, through Mini Holland, funded one place, actually 2, but Walthamstow was the main one, to develop bike infrastructure to the standard of a Dutch town, not just incrementally, but transformationally. And that's exactly what's happened here where I live. So every main road in Walthamstow has fully segregated bike lanes. Every residential area is a low traffic neighbourhood. There are beautifully designed modal filters everywhere. There are Sheffield stands outside every shop, and every station has a proper bike store. It's fully indoor, lockable bike store, and so it's what you would have in Holland, and it shows that it can be done. And then during
Are people cycling as a result? That's a key.
Oh God, yeah, absolutely, everywhere. And not just delivery drivers. There are also lots of delivery drivers, all dressed in black without lights,
Right.
and so. People from all over the country, hundreds of local authority folk have come and visited Walthamstow to learn how it's done. I mean, it's been the number of times my local high street, Orford Road, has been on reports and in conferences. And then during the pandemic, especially when everyone wanted to try and do low traffic neighbourhoods and cycle lanes, the learning experience from Walthamstow was incredibly powerful. So I was like, okay, that's really interesting. Let's do that for Swiss-style rural transport integration. Let's create one mini Switzerland where we do this in one place really well as a national scale learning demonstrator. And we can discover how quickly demand ramps up, how these things are used, what you need to do to make this happen, what the demand profile looks like through the day.
And happily, you've chosen somewhere called Hope Valley.
I mean, you couldn't make it up, could you? There were many reasons why we chose Hope, but if you want to prove what is possible, where better to do it than a place called Hope? But the reason we chose Hope Valley was twofold. One, there's a fantastic local community action group there called Hope Valley Climate Action, and they've been superb in driving this alongside me. Roger Clark, their trustee, is the sort of co-leader of this project with me, because I put out a call saying where wants to do this. And the second reason, Hope Valley is just perfect for a mini Switzerland demonstrator, because
Tell us about Hope Valley and where it is.
Yeah, so Hope Valley is in Derbyshire. Though if you look at a railway map, you would not think of it as Midlands, you'd think of it as North, because it's on the line that connects Sheffield and Manchester. And the residents don't look to Derby or Nottingham as their local cities. They look to Manchester and Sheffield as their local cities. Crucially, it already has the hourly frequency train service that is essential to a Swiss-style transport system. You have to have a regular hourly train service for the Swiss system to work, and they have that already. It has 5 stations along the route, all very rural. It has a large collection of villages, most of which are not adjacent at the station and are connected by very, very poor quality, disconnected bus services that don't meet the trains. It has a huge visitor economy and a huge range of attractions in the area, some of which are absolutely packed with cars that cause congestion and double parking and frustrates the local residents. And Sheffield and Manchester, which are the end of this line, have 30% of people in each that have no household access to a car. So these people are unable to reach all of these wonderful places that are on their doorstep because the transport doesn't provide it for them. So there's so many reasons why Hope Valley is the perfect place to demonstrate this. But it has many of the same challenges that all of rural Britain has, of people disconnected from opportunity because of poor transport.
But how can you break this deadlock? I mean, we have a very different structure. We're not Switzerland. We don't have integrated kind of concept. Barely.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, in Switzerland, by law, there is a duty to cooperate. All 250 transport companies in Switzerland have a legal duty to cooperate, whereas we have the opposite. We have competition legislation that makes it very difficult and makes operators nervous about being seen to cooperate. So it's not easy. So what have we done so far? We've come up with what the model looks like. We've come up with the transport plan for the Hope Valley with the Swiss model, which, the core features of the Swiss model are hourly service, perfect integration at stations of timetabling, full ticketing and fares integration between rail and bus, every day, high quality. They're the core features you need to get right. So we've developed that plan, and we did so thanks to a grant from the Foundation of Integrated Transport that, as a project, we won. We have developed a wonderful little voluntary team who have been, there's some really great people from around the industry, and you can see their names in the Mini Switzerland report, which you can find if you go to www.freewheeling.info /mini-Switzerland. You can find the full report there, and you can see all the people who've been involved in creating it. And we're now working very closely with, we've met the Mayor of the East Midlands, who was really positive, Claire Ward, the team from East Midlands County Combined Authority, the Department for Transport, the Northern Rail, the local bus operators. There's a huge groundswell of support and desire to make this work, which is fantastic. I'm not promising it'll happen tomorrow. I'm not promising it'll happen at all, because there's a lot of work to be done. But everyone who needs to want this to happen is wanting this to happen. And lots of conversations are happening right now involving me, HVCA, and our voluntary team with all of those organizations on a literally daily basis to work out a way in which we can make this happen.
And obviously the question is money. Who would pay for this, and how would that work?
The only way this is going to work is a coalition of the willing. There's a whole load of different organizations, and I've listed most of them just now, who want this to happen and have a stake in making this happen. It can't just be the local combined authority, EMCCA, because while this is in Derbyshire, this is the whole point of this, is that it is a national scale learning demonstrator. It can't just be DFT, because it happens in a place and that place will get most of the benefits from it. The local operators obviously have an interest in this happening and will gain commercial opportunity if there's more bus service in the local area, but it can't just be a commercial opportunity, because if it was commercial, it would already be happening, and it doesn't. Everyone who I listed there has a reason why this should happen. And the only way this is going to work is if everyone chips in to make this happen.
Well, that's a fantastic kind of ambition, and I'm really impressed, and I wish you all the best with it. Just was a last question. If it were to happen, how quickly do you think you could bring it about?
I mean, in one sense, the lovely thing about this is it can be done quickly. As long as you already have the hourly frequency train service, it's bus contracts. The existing tendered bus network in the Hope Valley expires in October, so there will have to be a new tender starting in 2027. So in theory, it could be 2027. Now, there's a lot of funding, assembly, and complexity to get through, which we're working through actively at the moment. So, am I going to stake my reputation on it being 2027? Probably not, but it could be. If not, then 2028. I mean, because it's a rural service in a national park, it makes sense to start it at the start of the season. So it would be Easter 27, Easter 28, Easter 29. They're the kind of dates it could start, but it could be next year. This is not. There's capital investment required as well, by the way. If we're going to do this, it's a demonstration of what it looks like to do it well. So things like crossings, but main roads need to be installed or upgraded to make sure you can reach bus stops on both sides. Bus and stop infrastructure needs to be improved. Hard standing needs to be installed in rural bus stops so that people don't get their shoes wet waiting for the bus. There has to be a comprehensive plan for what this looks like. And that's what's described in the report. It's not just bus timetabling, but it's nothing that takes that long or is that complicated.
Well, thanks, Thomas. That's absolutely great. And thank you for being on Calling All Stations. And maybe we'll come back to you in 6 months or a year and see how it's getting on.
Here's Christian's final thought from the Departure Lounge.
Well, there is an extraordinary statistic that I've come across. The Stonehenge tunnel that was going to be on the A303, that was long discussed to enable traffic to flow more freely past the henge and therefore, hopefully improve the environment or whatever, has been finally scrapped. The idea, was very controversial because people were very worried it would damage the stones and that it would, really create something of a motorway next to the stones and it would be detrimental and so on. It has finally been scrapped. It was a Labour promise and one hopes that there'll be other schemes that maybe they will scrap. But anyway, this is one of the big ones. But in the small print announcing this, they said this has cost £179 million. And it's before a single sod has been turned. It's before any work has been carried out. They spent £179 million on designing a tunnel underneath a basically small hill and a flat bit of land. And you think, how can they do that? How does that happen? And why is that not an utter scandal? That it shows everything about it. It's along with the Bat Tunnel that, costs more than £100 million and other kind of aspects of this. They've spent nearly £1 billion so far on the Lower Thames crossing before any construction has been. There is something inherently wrong with our system and it needs to be addressed.
Thank you for listening to Calling All Stations, the transport podcast with Christian Warmar, which is produced by Cogitamus Limited, a leading provider of public affairs consultancy services in the sector. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please do consider giving us a 5-star rating with whichever platform you use. Do follow us on social media. You can find Cogitamus Limited, Calling All Stations podcast, Christian Warmar and Mark Walker across a variety of platforms, including LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky and X.